Let's go. Anyway, back to business. It's your girl, Grandma Moses. Okay, it's time to go over uh, the signs of incest, locating lost children, um, surnames associated with incestuous families, the gods associated with incest, the first known incestuous relationships of Native Americans, and we're going to try to see if we can find the um, any stories pertaining to fathers that impregnated their daughters on purpose. And get, can you turn the turn it on, turn the settings to where it don't cut off to like 5 minutes or something like that. Go to settings and screen or something. Just give it to me when you open it. All right. Alrighty, give me 1 second. The devil is busy and the devil is also alive. All right. Okay, so we are first going to look at signs of incest. Okay, this is an AI overview, and it says potential signs of incest. Incest or familial sexual abuse is a complex and deeply damaging form of trauma that can have profound and lasting effects on individuals and families. It is important to understand that these are general indicators and not definitive proof of abuse. If you suspect someone is being abused, it is crucial to seek professional help and guidance. Okay, so behavioral and emotional signs. In children, sudden behavioral changes, regression, bedwetting, thumb sucking, nightmares or sleep disturbances, or intense fears. Inappropriate sexual behaviors, displaying sexual knowledge or behavior beyond their developmental stage, acting out sexual acts, or inappropriate sexual contact with other children. Social withdrawal or changes, withdrawal from peers and activities, reluctance to go home, avoiding certain people or places. Self harm and suicidal ideation are serious red flags. Changes in hygiene or wearing baggy clothes to hide their body, taking on caretaker role, being overly responsible for siblings or family members. In adults, mental and emotional health, depression, anxiety, mood swings, post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or difficulty forming healthy relationships. Self harm or substance abuse, engaging in self injurious behaviors, cutting, burning, or turning to drugs or alcohol to cope. Difficulties with intimacy and relationships, problems forming or maintaining healthy relationships, fear of closeness or intimacy. Sexual difficulties, aversions to intimacy, difficulty experiencing pleasure, or conversely, engaging in risky sexual behaviors. Chronic pain. Let me make sure I can hear. because I don't see the sound bubble. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So I can hear. Alrighty. Back to business. All right. So, chronic pain or physical complaints, unexplained physical pain, gastrointestinal issues, or other somatic symptoms. Emotional incest, blurred boundaries in familial relationships, feeling responsible for a parent's emotional needs, difficulty establishing autonomy. Ooh, turn that off. Physical signs, injuries, bruises, pain, or injury to the genital or anal area, difficulty walking or sitting. This is abuse. We want signs of incest. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, this is the National Library of Medicine. Characteristics and risk factors for sibling incest. The abstract. Sibling sexual behavior, despite historical and cross cultural incest taboos and biologically driven incest avoidance, poses a persistent problem. We tested factors theorized to be associated with sibling incest in a cross sectional online survey of 1,863 respondents with siblings mainly from North America and Germany. We found that 13% of participants reported engaging in sexual contact with a sibling, typically starting at the age of 10, and that step siblings and half siblings were more likely to engage in sibling incest than full siblings. Curiosity in games were the primary motivators. Being coerced was more prevalent among female and younger participants. The study underscores both individual impulsivity, concurrent childhood sexual behavior problems, and family level factors. Examples: presence of step sibling, positive attitudes toward nudity, sexual abuse by a parent. Influencing liability to engage in sexual behaviors with a sibling. Findings were robust across English and German speaking participants, suggesting our results are generalizable. Professionals addressing problematic child sexual behavior should assess for concurrent sibling incest and evaluate positive family attitudes toward nudity, sexual abuse by parents, and reduced disgust to sibling incest as potential risk factors for sibling incest. The findings stress the need for comprehensive sexual education in blended households where age gaps and diminished genetic relatedness contribute to sibling sexual behavior. Introduction. It is an evolutionary and social puzzle why some individuals engage in sex with their siblings despite widespread incest taboos, religious or cultural norms about acceptable sexual relationships, and biologically driven incest avoidance, sexual indifference, or aversion among close relatives. Solving this puzzle is critical because every year millions of intrafamilial child sexual abuse cases result in legal or social service actions, with siblings being more common perpetrators than fathers or stepfathers. Indeed, most sexual offenses committed by youth are committed against younger related children, particularly younger siblings. The sequelae of sibling incest can be severe and wide ranging, including mental health problems, substance use, sexual dysfunction, and risky behavior, including risky sexual behavior. Yet, we know remarkably little about characteristics and risk factors for sibling incest. CETO has identified factors that could explain sibling incest in a review of existing theories. Many of these theories focus on cues of relatedness as triggers for incest avoidance, including Western Marxist hypothesis regarding the effects of close proximity in childhood, Lieberman hypothesis about maternal neonatal association, observing younger siblings as babies with one's mother, and the hypothesis about physical resemblance being a cue of relatedness. Of these, Westermarck's close proximity hypothesis has received the most empirical support, though Rantala and Marcinkowska have argued that close proximity is not sufficient because multiple kinship cues inform incest avoidance. These distal explanations of sibling incest, focused on factors present in childhood, have been hypothesized to manifest through the proximal mechanisms of disgust at the idea of sex with a sibling and a lack of sexual attraction to siblings. More clinical theories of incest focus on more proximal factors, suggesting that family dysfunction, antisocial tendencies, atypical sexuality, or social unpopularity can explain sibling incest. Some of these factors have empirical support. For example, Griffey surveyed a student sample of 1,821 women and 1,064 men recruited from U.S. colleges and found that sibling incest was more likely when siblings shared a bed or took baths together. Family nudity was common, or parent child incest had taken place. Approximately a quarter of sibling incest, 38 out of 137 participants, was characterized as coercive by participants, but the nature of this coerciveness was not explained. Okay, let's go back. Let's just go into incest. In the Bible. Okay, the Bible addresses incest with various perspectives. While some relationships are clearly prohibited, others are presented in ways that require interpretation. Specific prohibitions are found in Leviticus 18, which forbids sexual relations with close family members. However, other narratives like Abraham claiming his wife Sarah was also his sister, and the story of Lot's daughter engaged in incest to preserve their lineage, introduce complexities to the understanding of biblical perspectives on incest. Here's a more detailed breakdown. Explicit prohibitions. Leviticus 18 explicitly forbids sexual relations between a man and his mother, father, daughter, son's daughter, daughter's daughter, stepmother, sister, including half sister, granddaughter, aunt, uncle's wife, daughter in law, brother's wife, or sister in law. Leviticus 18, verses 7 through 18. Theological interpretations. Jewish tradition and some early church fathers, such as Augustine, Chrysostom, and Irenaeus, interpreted Lot's daughter's actions as permissible due to the belief that they were the last people on earth and needed to repopulate it. The narrative complexity. The story of Abraham and Sarah presents a complex situation where Abraham claims his wife is also his sister. This incident, along with the story of Lot's daughters, highlights that biblical narratives often offer varying perspectives on incest, which can be understood in light of cultural and theological context. Now, let's just go ahead and jump in. Okay. So this is Incest in the Bible, Wikipedia. So narratives featuring incest can be found in the Hebrew Bible, which contains mentions of various types of sexual relationships. It also lays out rules and regulations with regard to prohibited degree of kinship. These prohibitions are found predominantly in Leviticus 18, 7 to 18, and chapter 20, verses 11 through 21, but also in Deuteronomy. Endogamy was the preferred practice in many parts of the ancient Near East. The ideal marriage, in fact, was usually one to a cousin, and it was often forbidden for an eldest daughter to even marry outside of the family at all. Ew. Other endogamous relationships, namely avunculate marriages and sibling marriages, while considered outright incestuous by most of the world today, were also common among a number of ancient Eastern societies, such as that of ancient Egypt and ancient China. Biblical commentary on human sexual behavior is less critical for events that are described as taking place before the law of Moses was issued by God to the Israelites. For example, the book of Genesis discusses the marriage of Abraham and Sarah without criticizing Abraham's claim that they were half siblings. And the book of Samuel treats the marriage of a royal prince to his half sister as simply unusual rather than wicked. Instances. The Hebrew Bible mentions a number of instances in which marriage and sexual intercourse occurs between close kin, mostly dated to before the Sinai period. In Genesis 9, verses 20 through 27, Ham saw his father Noah's nakedness. The Talmud suggests that Ham may have sodomized Noah, according to the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 70a. In more recent times, some scholars have suggested that Ham may have had intercourse with his father's wife. Abraham's brother Nahor married his niece Milcah, the daughter of his other brother Haran. Living in an isolated area after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the two daughters of Lot conspired to inebriate and seduce their father due to the lack of available sexual partners. Because of intoxication, Lot perceived not, quote unquote, when his firstborn daughter and the following night his younger daughter lay with him. Genesis 19:32 through 35. The two children born were directly Lot's sons and indirectly his grandsons, being his daughter's sons. Likewise, their sons were also half brothers between them and with their mothers, having the same father, as well as cousins, having mothers that were sisters. Confusion. In one of the tales of a wife confused for a sister, Abraham states that his wife Sarah is his half sister, the daughter of his father, but not his mother. However, in rabbinic literature, Sarah is considered Abraham's niece, the daughter of his brother Haran. Marriage of cousins was common in the pre-Sinai period. Abraham's son Isaac married Rebekah, his first cousin once removed, the granddaughter of his father Abraham's brother Nahor, with Milcah. Isaac and Rebekah's firstborn son Esau resorted to marrying his cousin Mahalath, daughter of his father's brother Ishmael, because his parents didn't approve of him having relationships with Canaanites. Isaac and Rebekah's second son Jacob married his cousins Leah and Rachel, who were daughters of his mother's brother Laban. Leah and Rachel were sisters. A wife's sister is also forbidden. Jacob's firstborn son Reuben had sex with his father's concubine Bilhah. Judah, Jacob's fourth son, mistook his daughter-in-law Tamar for a prostitute while she was veiled and had sex with her. Amram married his paternal aunt Jochebed, the mother of Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. However, according to the Septuagint, she was his cousin. Amnon, King David's eldest son and heir to the throne, raped his half-sister Tamar. Tamar's brother Absalom learned of the incident and 2 years later ordered his servants to have Amnon killed. In vain with Amnon, Tamar said, "Now therefore I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee." Absalom, son of King David, in the middle of a rebellion against his father, had sex with his father's concubines on the roof inside a tent. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, and Naaman married Maacah, daughter of Absalom. 2 Samuel 14, verse 27, does not list Maacah as a daughter of Absalom, but Absalom seems to have had sex with the wives of David, his father, at the advice of Ahithophel. Zelophehad's daughters, Mala, Tirzah, Hogla, Milcah, and Noah, married their cousins on their father's side to obey the Lord's command. The Lord said, "No inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another." Caleb said, "I will give my daughter Axa in marriage to the one who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer." Othniel, son of Caleb's brother Kenaz, was the one who conquered it, so Axa became Othniel's wife. Prohibited relationships. Leviticus 18:7-11 and 20:11 through 21 sets out list of prohibited relationships, and 2 chapters later specify punishments for such unions. But the second list of unions is much shorter than the first. Critical scholars regard the list as having originally been independent documents bound together at a later point. The Deuteronomic Code gives a yet more simple list of prohibited relationships: a man's parent's daughter, including his sister; a man's father's wife, including his mother; and a man's mother-in-law. In the Hebrew Bible, sexual relationships between siblings are forbidden to Jews but permissible to Gentiles, non-Jews. The relationships prohibited by Leviticus 18 are one's mother, one's father, one's stepmother, one's paternal or maternal sister, one's paternal sister through one's father's wife, one's daughter, one's granddaughter, a woman and her daughter, a woman and her granddaughter, one's aunt by blood, one's father's brother or uncle, one's father's brother's wife or aunt, one's daughter-in-law, one's brother's wife or sister-in-law, with the exception of Yibam, whatever that means, one's wife's sister or sister-in-law during one's wife's lifetime, even if since divorced. The list of prohibited relationships can be summarized as follows. The relations highlighted in red are those that are prohibited. Okay, so one of the most notable features of each list is that sexual relations between a man and his own daughter is not explicitly prohibited. Look at the drawing. Although the first relation mentioned after the Levitical prohibition of sex with near kin names that of thy father, it must be taken into account that the Hebrew original text only addresses male Jews with regard to their female relatives. The Talmud argues that the absence is because the prohibition was obvious, especially given the proscription against a relationship with a granddaughter, although some biblical scholars have instead proposed that it was originally in the list but was then accidentally left out from the copy on which modern versions of the text ultimately depend, due to a mistake by the scribe. The second list in the Holiness Code noticeably differs from the first by not including the closer relatives, and it might be assumed that obviousness is the explanation here as well. One might argue that the explicit prohibition against engaging in sexual activity with a woman as well as her daughter implicitly forbids sexual activity between a man and his daughter. However, the rationale might suggest otherwise. The original text is unclear here, since it mentions only that they, quote unquote, the woman and the daughter are related. John Calvin did not consider the father daughter relation to be explicitly forbidden by the Bible, but regarded it as immoral nevertheless. Apart from the case of the daughter, the first incest list in Leviticus roughly produces the same rules as applied in early pre Islamic Arabic culture. In Islam, these pre Islamic rules were made statutory. Ezekiel implies that in his time, marriage between a man and his stepmother or his daughter in law or his sister were frequent. This situation seems to be the target of the Deuteronomic version of the incest prohibition, which only addresses roughly the same three issues, though prohibiting the mother in law in place of the daughter in law. Early rabbinic commentators instead argued that the Deuteronomic list is so short because the other possible liaisons were obviously prohibited, and these three were the only liaisons difficult to detect, as in their day, a man's stepmother, half sister, and mother in law usually lived in the same house as the man prior to any liaison. Also, cousins are not included in the list of prohibited relationships. It is not considered incestuous. Sex specific rules. The biblical lists are not symmetrical. The implied rules for women are not the same. They compare as follows. Yeah, you can check that out on your own. Okay. Now, this is the incest. Incest is sex between close relatives, for example, a brother, sister, or parent. This typically includes sexual activity between people in consanguinity or blood relations, and sometimes those related by lineage. It is condemned and considered immoral in many societies. It can lead to an increased risk of genetic disorders in children in case of pregnancy from incestuous sex. The incest taboo is one of the most widespread of all cultural taboos, both in present and in past societies. Most modern societies have laws regarding incest or social restrictions on closely consanguineous marriages. In societies where it is illegal, consensual adult incest is seen by some as a victimless crime. Some cultures extend the incest taboo to relatives with no consanguinity, such as milk siblings, whatever that means, step siblings, and adoptive siblings, albeit sometimes with less intensity. Third degree relatives, such as half aunt, half nephew, first cousin, on average have 12.5% common genetic heritage, and sexual relations between them are viewed differently in various cultures, from being discouraged to being socially acceptable. Children of incestuous relationships have been regarded as illegitimate and are still so regarded in some societies today. In most cases, the parents did not have the option to marry to remove that status, as incestuous marriages were and are normally also prohibited. A common justification for prohibiting incest is avoiding inbreeding, a collection of genetic disorders suffered by the children of parents with a close genetic relationship. Such children are at greater risk of congenital disorders, developmental and physical disability, and death. That risk is proportional to their parents' coefficient of relationship, a measure of how closely the parents are related genetically. However, cultural anthropologists have noted that inbreeding avoidance cannot form the sole basis for the incest taboo, because the boundaries of the incest prohibition vary widely between cultures and not necessarily in ways that maximize the avoidance of inbreeding. In some societies, such as those of ancient Egypt, brother, sister, father, daughter, mother, son, cousin, aunt, nephew, uncle, niece, and the other combinations of relations within a royal family were married as a means of perpetuating the royal lineage. Some societies have different views about what constitutes illegal or immoral incest. For example, in Samoa, a man was permitted to marry his older sister, but not his younger sister. However, sexual relations with a first degree relative, meaning a parent, sibling, or child, were almost universally forbidden. The English word incest is derived from the Latin incestus, which has a general meaning of impure, unchaste. It was introduced into Middle English, both in the generic Latin sense preserved throughout the Middle English period and in the narrow modern sense. The derived adjective incestuous appears in the 16th century. Before the Latin term came in, incest was known in Old English as sibleger, Siblegr, from sib, sibb, meaning kinship, plus leger or ledger, meaning to lie, or mag Maghamid, it's like Muhammad, from maeg, kin or parent, Hamed, meaning sexual intercourse, but in time both words fell out of use. Terms like incestor and incestual have been used to describe those interested or involved in sexual relations with relatives among humans, while inbreeder has been used in relation to similar behavior among non-human organisms. Antiquity. In ancient China, first cousins with the same surnames, those born to father's brothers, were not permitted to marry, while those with different surnames could marry. Maternal cousins and paternal cousins born to the father's sister. In the Achaemenid Persia, marriages between family members such as half siblings, nieces, and cousins took place but were not seen as incestuous. However, Greek sources state that brother, sister, and father daughter marriages allegedly took place inside the royal family, yet it remains problematic to determine the reliability of these accounts. According to Herodotus, Shah Cambyses II supposedly married two of his sisters, Atossa and Roxanne. This would have been regarded as illegal. However, Herodotus also states that Cambyses married uh, Otanus's daughter, Fatima, whilst his contemporary Ctesias names Roxanne as Cambyses' wife, but she is not referred to as his sister. The accusations against Cambyses of committing incest are mentioned as part of his blasphemous actions, which were designed to illustrate his madness and vanity. These reports all derive from the same Egyptian source that was antagonistic towards Cambyses, and some of these allegations of said crimes, such as the killing of the Apis bull, have been confirmed as false, which means that the report of Cambyses' supposed incestuous acts is questionable. Several of the Egyptian kings married their sisters and had several children with them to continue the royal bloodline. For example, Tutankhamun married his half sister Akhishnamun and was himself the child of an incestuous union between Akhenaten and an unidentified sister wife. Several scholars, such as Fryer et al., state that sibling marriages were widespread among all classes in Egypt during the Greco Roman period, meaning when all the seed mixing craziness was going on. Numerous papyri and the Roman census declarations attest to many husbands and wives being brother and sister of the same father and mother. However, it has also been argued that the available evidence does not support the view that such relations were common. The most famous of these relationships were in the Ptolemaic royal family. Cleopatra VII was married to two of her younger brothers, Ptolemy the 13th and Ptolemy the 14th, whilst her mother and father, Cleopatra V and Ptolemy the 12th, were also brother and sister. Arsinoe II and her younger brother Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, were the first in the family to participate in a full sibling marriage, a departure from custom. A union between full siblings was counter-normative in Greek and Macedonian tradition and prohibited by the laws of at least some cities. The fable of Oedipus, with a theme of inadvertent incest between a mother and son, ends in disaster and shows ancient taboos against incest. Since Oedipus blinds himself in disgust and shame after his incestuous actions. In the sequel to Oedipus, Antigone, his four children are also punished for their parents' incestuousness. Incest appears in the commonly accepted version of the birth of Adonis, aka Drake, when his mother Mira has sex with her father Cinyras during a festival disguised as a prostitute. In ancient Greece, Spartan king Leonidas I, hero of the legendary Battle of Thermopylae, was married to his niece Gorbo, daughter of his half-brother Cleomenes I. Greek law allowed marriage between a brother and sister if they had different mothers. For example, some accounts say that Elpinice was for a time married to her half-brother Simon or Simon, whatever. Incest is mentioned and condemned in Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6. Oh my God, what happened to Virgil? This one invaded a daughter's room and a forbidden sex act. Roman civil law prohibited marriages within 4 degrees of consanguinity, but had no degrees of infinity with regard to marriage. Roman civil laws prohibited any marriage between parents and children, either in the ascending or descending line ad infinitum. Adoption was considered the same as affinity in that an adoptive father could not marry an unemancipated daughter or granddaughter, even if the adoption had been dissolved. Incestuous unions were discouraged and considered nefas, Nefas, against the laws of gods and man in ancient Rome. In AD 295, incest was explicitly forbidden by an imperial edict, which divided the concept of incestus into two categories of unequal gravity: the incestus Iuris Gentium, which was applied to both Romans and non-Romans in the empire, and the Incestus Iuris Civilis, which concerned only Roman citizens. Therefore, for example, an Egyptian could marry an aunt, but a Roman could not. Despite the act of incest being unacceptable within the Roman Empire, Roman Emperor Caligula is rumored to have had sexual relations with all three of his sisters, Julia Livilla, Drusilla, and Agrippina the Younger. Emperor Claudius, after executing his previous wife, married his brother's daughter, Agrippina the Younger, and changed the law to allow an otherwise illegal union. Who thought to change the laws and times? 2:19 on the clock. The taboo against incest in ancient Rome is demonstrated by the fact that politicians would use charges of incest, often false charges, as insults and means of political disenfranchisement. In Norse mythology, there are themes of brother-sister marriage, a prominent example being between Njord and his unnamed sister, perhaps Nerthus, parents of Freya and Freyr. Loki, in turn, also accuses Freya and Freyr of having a sexual relationship. Okay, biblical references again. The earliest biblical reference to possible incest involves Cain. It was cited that he knew his wife and she conceived and bore Enoch. A literalist reading of this passage indicates that during this period there was no other woman except Eve, or there was an unnamed sister, in which case Cain had an incestual relationship with his mother or his sister. According to the book of Jubilees, Cain married his sister Awan, or Awan. Later in Genesis 20 of the Hebrew Bible, the patriarch Abraham married his half sister Sarah. Other references include the passage in 2 Samuel 13, where Amnon, King David's son, rapes his half sister Tamar. According to Michael D. Coogan, it would have been perfectly all right for Amnon to have married her, the Bible being inconsistent about prohibiting incest. In Genesis 19:30-38, while living in an isolated area after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's two daughters conspired to inebriate and rape their father due to the lack of available partners to continue his line of descent. Because of intoxication, Lot perceived not when his firstborn, and the following night his younger daughter lay with him. Moses was also born of an incestuous marriage. Exodus 6 details how his father Amram was the nephew of his mother Jochebed. An account noted that the incestuous relations did not suffer the fate of childlessness, which was the punishment for such couples in Levitical law. It stated, however, that the incest exposed Moses to the peril of wild beasts, of the weather, of the water, and more. From the Middle Ages onward, many European monarchs were related due to political marriages, such that many such marriages were between cousins of some degree, uncles and nieces, and so forth, and sometimes first cousins. This was especially true in the Habsburg, Hohenzollern, Savoy, and Bourbon royal houses. However, relations between siblings, which may have been tolerated in other cultures, were considered abhorrent. For example, the false accusation that Anne Boleyn and her brother George Boleyn had committed incest was one of the reasons given for both being executed in May 1536. Historians agree that the false accusation against Anne Boleyn and George Boleyn was trumped up in order to ensure the king could go on to marry Jane Seymour. Sects deemed heretical, such as the Waldensians, were accused of incest. Incestuous marriages were also seen in the royal houses of ancient Japan and Korea, Inca Peru, ancient Hawaii, and at times Central Africa, Mexico, and Thailand. Like the kings of ancient Egypt, the Inca rulers married their sisters. Huayna Capac, for instance, was the son of Topa Inca Yupanqui and the Inca's sister and wife. Half-sibling marriages were found in ancient Japan, such as the marriage of Emperor Badatsu and his half-sister Empress Suko. Japanese Prince Kanashi no Karu had sexual relations with his full sister, Princess Karu no Aratsumi, although the action was regarded as foolish. In order to prevent the influence of the other families, Korean Goryeo dynasty monarch Gwangjong married his half-sister Daemok in the 10th century. Marriage with a family member not related by blood was also regarded as contravening morality and was therefore incest. One example of this is the 14th century Chunghae of Goryeo, who raped one of his deceased father's concubines, who was thus regarded to be his mother. In a few parts of India, cousin marriage and uncle-niece marriage was common, though it has reduced a lot in the 21st century. Others, in some Southeast Asian cultures, stories of incest being common among certain ethnicities are sometimes told as expressions of contempt for those ethnicities. Marriages between younger brothers and their older sisters were common among the early Udage people. Prevalence and statistics. Incest between an adult and a person under the age of consent is considered a form of child sexual abuse that has been shown to be one of the most extreme forms of childhood abuse. It often results in serious and long term psychological trauma, especially in the case of parental incest. Its prevalence is difficult to generalize, but research has estimated 10 to 15% of the general population as having had at least one such sexual contact, with less than 2% involving intercourse or attempted intercourse. Among women, research has yielded estimates as high as 20%. Father daughter incest was for many years the most commonly reported and studied form of incest. Mother son incest is rarely reported. According to Catanzarite of 1980, between 1965 and 1980, only a handful of such cases were documented. Catanzarite attributes this to selection bias and the lack of physical evidence in such cases. According to uh, Etherington, 1997, one of the reasons of the underreporting of such cases is that men often found difficulty in defining their mother's behavior as abuse. In a clinical study by Olson, 1990, 30 men had been victims of incest. The mother was a perpetrator in 61.5% of cases. In a clinical study by Kelly et al. 2002, among the 67 sexually abused men in 17 cases, the perpetrators were their mothers. More recently, studies have suggested that sibling incest, particularly older brothers having sexual relations with younger siblings, is the most common form of incest, with some studies finding sibling incest occurring more frequently than other forms of incest. Some studies suggest that adolescent perpetrators of sibling abuse choose younger victims, abuse victims over a lengthier period, use violence more frequently and severely than adult perpetrators, and that sibling abuse has a higher rate of penetrative acts than father or stepfather incest, with father and older brother incest resulting in greater reported distress than stepfather incest. South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Pakistan, and Nigeria are some of the countries with the most incest through consanguineous marriage. Hmm. Types between adults and children. Sex between an adult family member and a child is usually considered a form of child sexual abuse, also known as child incestuous abuse, and for many years has been the most reported form of incest. Father daughter and stepfather sex are the most commonly reported forms of adult child incest, with most of the remaining involving a mother or stepmother. Many studies found that stepfathers tend to be far more likely than biological fathers to engage in this form of incest. One study of adult women in San Francisco estimates that 17% of women were abused by stepfathers and 2% were abused by biological fathers. Father son incest is reported less often, but is not known how close the frequency is to heterosexual incest because it is probably more underreported. The prevalence of incest between parents and their children is difficult to estimate due to secrecy and privacy. In a 1999 news story, the BBC reported close knit family life in India masked an alarming amount of sexual abuse of children and teenage girls by family members, a new report suggests. Delhi organization Rahi said 76% of respondents to its survey had been abused when they were children, 40% of those by a family member. According to the National Center for Victims of Crime, a large proportion of rape committed in the United States is perpetuated by a family member. Research indicates that 46% of children who are raped are victims of family members. The majority of American rape victims are raped before the age of 18. Furthermore, 29% of all rapes occurred when the victim was less than 11 years old. 11% of rape victims are raped by their fathers or stepfathers, and another 16% are raped by other relatives. Adults who, as children, were incestuously victimized by adults often suffer from low self esteem, difficulties in interpersonal relationships, and sexual dysfunction, and are at an extremely high risk of many mental disorders, including depression, anxiety disorders, phobic avoiding phobic avoidance reactions, somatoform disorder, substance abuse, borderline personality disorder, and complex post traumatic stress disorder. The Goler clan in Nova Scotia is a specific instance in which child sexual abuse in the form of forced adult child and sibling incest took place over at least 3 generations. A number of Goler children were victims of sexual abuse at the hands of fathers, mothers, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers, cousins, and each other. During interrogation by police, several of the adults openly admitted to engaging in many forms of sexual activity, up to and including full intercourse multiple times with children. 16 adults, both men and women, were charged with hundreds of allegations of incest and sexual abuse of children as young as 5. In July 2012, 12 children were removed from the Colt family, a pseudonym in New South Wales, Australia, after the discovery of 4 generations of incest. Child protection workers and psychologists said interviews with the children indicated a virtual sexual free for all. While incest between adults and children generally involves the adult as the perpetrator of abuse, there are rare instances of sons sexually assaulting their mothers. These sons are typically mid adolescent to young adult, and unlike parent initiated incest, the incidents involve some kind of physical force. Although the mothers may be accused of being seductive with their sons and inviting the sexual contact, this is contrary to evidence. Such accusations can parallel other forms of rape where, due to victim blaming, a woman is accused of being at fault for the rape. In some cases, mother son incest is best classified as acquaintance rape of the mother by the adolescent son. Between children, childhood sibling incest is considered to be widespread but rarely reported. Sibling incest becomes child on child sexual abuse when it occurs without consent, without equality, or as a result of coercion. In this form, it is believed to be the most common form of intrafamilial abuse. The most commonly reported form of abusive sibling incest is abuse of a younger sibling by an older sibling. Sibling abusive incest is most prevalent in families where one or both parents are often absent or emotionally unavailable, with the abusive siblings using incest as a way to assert their power over a weaker sibling. Absence of the father, in particular, has been found to be a significant element of most cases of sexual abuse of female children by a brother. Between adults, proponents of incest between consenting adults draw clear boundaries between the behavior of consenting adults on one hand and rape, child molestation, and abusive incest on the other. However, even consensual relationships such as these are still legally classified as incest and criminalized in many jurisdictions, although there are certain exceptions. James Roffey, a senior lecturer in criminology at Monash University and former worker on legal responses to familial sexual activity in England and Wales and Scotland, discussed how the European Convention on Human Rights deems all familial sexual acts to be criminal, even if all parties give their full consent and are knowledgeable to all possible consequences. He also argues that the use of particular language tools in the legislation manipulates the reader to deem all familial sexual activities as immoral and criminal, even if all parties are consenting adults. Aunts, uncles, mothers, fathers, nieces, or nephews. In the Netherlands, marrying one's nephew or niece is legal, but only with the explicit permission of the Dutch government, due to the possible risk of genetic defects among the offspring. Nephew-niece marriages predominantly occur among foreign immigrants. In November 2008, the Scientific Institute of the Christian Democratic Party, CDA, announced that it wanted a ban on marriages to nephews and nieces. Consensual sex between individuals aged 18 and older is always lawful in the Netherlands and Belgium, even among closely related family members. Sexual acts between an adult family member and a minor are illegal, though they are classified not as incest but as abuse of authority, such as an adult has over a minor, comparable to that of a teacher, coach, or priest. In Florida, consensual adult sexual intercourse with someone known to be one's aunt, uncle, niece, or nephew constitutes a felony of the third degree. Other states also commonly prohibit marriages between such kin. The legality of sex with a half aunt or half uncle varies state by state. In the United Kingdom, incest includes only sexual intercourse with a parent, grandparent, child, or sibling. But the more recently introduced offense of sex with an adult relative extends as far as half siblings, uncles, aunts, nephews, and nieces. However, the term incest remains widely used in popular culture to describe any form of sexual activity with a relative. In Canada, marriage between uncles and nieces and between aunts and nephews is illegal. Between adult siblings, one of the most public cases of adult sibling incest in the 2000s is the case of Patrick Stubing and Susan Karolowski, a brother-sister couple from Germany. Because of violent behavior on the part of his father, Patrick was taken in at the age of 3 by foster parents, who adopted him later. At the age of 23, he learned about his biological parents, contacted his mother, and met her and his then 16-year-old sister Susan for the first time. The now adult Patrick moved in with his birth family shortly thereafter. After their mother died suddenly 6 months later, the siblings became intimately close and had their first child together in 2001. By 2004, they had 4 children together: Eric, Sarah, Nancy, and Sophia. The public nature of their relationship and the repeated prosecutions and jail time they have served as a result have caused some in Germany to question whether incest between consenting adults should be punished at all. An article about them in Der Spiegel states that the couple are happy together. According to court records, the first 3 children have mental and physical disabilities and have been placed in foster care. In April 2012, at the European Court of Human Rights, Patrick Stubing lost his case that the conviction violated his rights to a private and family life. On 24 September 2014, the German Ethics Council recommended that the government abolish laws criminalizing incest between siblings, arguing that such bans impinge upon citizens. Some societies differentiate between full sibling and half sibling relationships. Cousin relationships, marriages, and sexual relationships between first cousins are stigmatized as incest in some cultures, but tolerated in much of the world. Currently, 24 U.S. states prohibit marriages between first cousins, and another 7 permit them only under special circumstances. The United Kingdom permits both marriage and sexual relations between first cousins. In some non-Western societies, marriages between close biological relatives account for 20 to 60% of all marriages. First and second cousin marriages are rare in Western Europe, North America, and Oceania, accounting for less than 1% of marriages, but reach 9% in South America, East Asia, and South Europe, and about 50% in regions of the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. Communities such as the Dond and the Bitani of Pakistan clearly prefer marriages between cousins due to the belief they ensure purity of the descent line, provide intimate knowledge of the spouses, and ensure the patrimony will not pass into the hands of outsiders. Cross-cousin marriages are preferred among the Yanomami of Brazilian Amazonia, among many other tribal societies identified by anthropologists. There are some cultures in Asia which stigmatize cousin marriage. In some instances, even marriages between second cousins are more remotely related people. This is notably true in the culture of Korea. In South Korea, between 1997, two people with the same last name and clan were prohibited from marrying. In light of this law being held unconstitutional, South Korea now only prohibits up to third cousins. According to Article 809 of the Korean Civil Code, Hmong culture prohibits the marriage of anyone with the same last name. To do so would result in being shunned by the entire community, and they are usually stripped of their last name. In a review of 48 studies of children parented by cousins, the rate of birth defects was twice that of non-related couples. 4% for cousin couples as opposed to 2% for the general population. Defined through marriage. Some cultures include relatives by marriage in incest prohibitions. These relationships are called affinity rather than consanguinity. For example, the question of the legality and morality of a widower who wished to marry his deceased wife's sister was the subject of long and fierce debate in the United Kingdom in the 19th century, involving, among others, Matthew Bolton and Charles Latrobe. The marriages were entered into in Scotland and Switzerland, respectively, where they were legal. In medieval Europe, Lateran the fourth ruled that standing as a godparent to a child also created a bond of affinity, which precluded legal marriage. But in other societies, a deceased spouse's sibling was considered the ideal person to marry. The Hebrew Bible forbids a man from marrying his brother's widow, with the exception that if his brother dies childless, the man is required to marry his brother's widow so as to raise up seed to him. Some societies have long practiced sororal polygamy, a form of polygamy in which a man marries multiple wives who are sisters to each other, though not closely related to him. In Islamic law, marriage among close blood relations like parents, step-parents, parents-in-law, siblings, step-siblings, the children of siblings, aunts, and uncles is forbidden, while first or second cousins may marry. Marrying the widow of a brother or the sister of a deceased or divorced wife is also allowed. Inbreeding. Offspring of biologically related parents are subject to the possible impact of inbreeding. Such offspring have a higher possibility of congenital birth defects, coefficient of relationship, because it increases the proportion of zygotes that are homozygous for deleterious recessive alleles that produce such disorders as inbreeding depression. Because most such alleles are rare in populations, it is unlikely that two unrelated marriage partners will both be heterozygous carriers. Heterozygous, whatever. However, because close relatives share a large fraction of their alleles, the probability that any such rare deleterious allele present in the common ancestor will be inherited from both related parents is increased dramatically with respect to non-inbred couples. Contrary to common belief, inbreeding does not in itself alter allele frequencies, but rather increases the relative proportion of homozygotes to heterozygotes. This has two contrary effects. In the short term, because incestuous reproduction increases zygosity, deleterious recessive alleles will express themselves more frequently, leading to increases in spontaneous abortions of zygotes, perinatal deaths, and postnatal offspring with birth defects. In the long run, however, because of this increased exposure of deleterious recessive alleles to natural selection, their frequency decreases more rapidly in inbred population, leading to a healthier quote unquote population with fewer deleterious recessive alleles. The closer the relationship between two persons, the higher the zygosity and thus the more severe the biological cost of inbreeding. This fact probably explains why inbreeding between close relatives, such as siblings, is less common than inbreeding between cousins. There may also be other deleterious effects besides those caused by recessive diseases. Thus, similar immune systems may be more vulnerable to infectious diseases. See major histocompatibility complex and sexual selection. In 1994, a 1994 study found a mean excess mortality with inbreeding among first cousins of 4.4%. Come on, what is this? A 2008 study also found decreased lifespan among offspring of first cousins, but no difference between lifespans after the second cousin level. A 1990 study conducted in South India found that the incidence of malformations was slightly higher in uncle niece progeny, 9.34%, compared to the first cousin progeny, 6.18%. Stillbirth rates were significantly higher among consanguineous couples, irrespective of the mother's socioeconomic status, and were higher in uncle niece matings compared to first cousin and beyond first cousin unions in both the poor and middle/upper class. Children of parent child or sibling unions are at increased risk compared to cousin cousin unions. Studies suggest that 20 through 36% of these children will die or have major disability due to the inbreeding. A study of 29 offspring resulting from brother, sister, or father daughter incest found that 20 had congenital abnormalities, including 4 directly attributable to autosomal recessive alleles. Laws. Laws regarding sexual activity between close relatives vary considerably between jurisdictions and depend on the type of sexual activity and the nature of the family relationship of the parties involved, as well as the age and sex of the parties. Prohibition of incest laws may extend to restrictions on marriage rights, which also vary between jurisdictions. Most jurisdictions prohibit parent, child, and sibling marriages, while others also prohibit first cousin and uncle niece and aunt nephew marriages. In most places, incest is illegal. The Catholic Church regards incest as a sin against the sacrament of matrimony. For the Catholic Church, at the heart of the immorality of incest is the corruption and disordering of proper family relations. These disordered relationships take on a particularly grave and immoral character when it becomes child sexual abuse. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, 2388, incest designates intimate relations between relatives or in laws within a degree that prohibits marriage between them. St. Paul stigmatizes this especially grave offense. It is actually reported that there is immorality among you, for a man is living with his father's wife. In the name of the Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Incest corrupts family relationships and marks a regression toward animality. 2389. Connected to incest is any sexual abuse perpetrated by adults on children or adolescents entrusted to their care. The offense is compounded by the scandalous harm done to the physical and moral integrity of the young, who will remain scarred by it all their lives, and the violation of responsibility for their upbringing. Islam. The Quran gives specific rules regarding incest, which prohibit a man from marrying or having sexual relations with his father's wife, his mother or stepmother, his mother-in-law, a woman from whom he has nursed, even the children of this woman, either parent, sister, aunt, his sister, his half-sister, a woman who has nursed from the same woman as him, and his sister-in-law, his wife's sister, while still married. Half relations are as sacred as full relations. His niece or child of a sibling, his daughter, his stepdaughter, if the marriage to her mother was consummated, and his daughter in law. Cousin marriage finds support in Islamic scriptures and is widespread in the Middle East. Although Islam allows cousin marriage, there are hadiths attributed to Muhammad calling for distance from the marriage of relatives. However, Muslim scholars generally consider these hadiths unreliable. Zoroastrian. In ancient Persia, incest between cousins is a blessed virtue, although in some sources, incest is believed to be related to that of parent, child, or brother, sister. Under Zoroastrianism, royalty, clergy, and commoners practiced incest, though the extent in the lattermost class was unknown. This tradition was called Zwidoda, Avestan, Zaytudoa. The tradition was considered so sacred that the bodily fluids produced by an incestuous couple were thought to have curative powers. For instance, the Vendidad advised corpse bearers to purify themselves with a mixture of the urine of a married incestuous couple. Ew. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his book The Birth of Tragedy, cited that among Zoroastrians, a wise priest is born only by Vetvadata. To what extent Vetvadata was practiced in Sasanian Iran and before, especially outside the royal and noble families of dynastic incest and perhaps the clergy, and whether practices ascribed to them can be assumed to be characteristic of the general population is not clear. There is a lack of genealogies and census material on the frequency of Zvatvodata. Evidence from Dura Europas, however, combined with that of the Jewish and Christian sources citing actual cases under the Sasanians, strengthens the evidence of the Zoroastrian text. In the post-Sasanian Zoroastrian literature, Vatvodata is said to refer to marriages between cousins instead, which have always been relatively common. It has been observed that such incestuous acts received a great deal of glorification as a religious practice, and in addition to being condemned by foreigners, though the reliability of these accusations is questionable since accusations of incest were a common way of denigrating other groups, were considered a great challenge by their own proponents, with accounts suggesting that four copulations was deemed a rare achievement worthy of eternal salvation. It has been suggested that because taking up incestuous relations was a great personal challenge, seemingly repugnant even to Zoroastrians of the time, it served as an honest signal of commitment and devotion to religious ideals. In Hinduism, Rig Veda regards incest to be evil. Hinduism speaks of incest in abhorrent terms. Hindus believe there are both karmic and practical bad effects of incest and thus practice strict rules of both endogamy and exogamy in relation to the family tree, Gatra, or bloodline, Pravara. Marriage within the Gatra Swavatra marriage is banned under the rule of exogamy in the traditional matrimonial system. People within the Gatra are regarded as kin, and marrying such a person would be thought of as incest. Marriage with paternal cousins, a form of parallel cousin relationship, is strictly prohibited. Traditional Hindu laws of marriage suggest that between a man and a woman who are about to marry, there should be no common ancestor, Gotra, between the groom and the bride for up to 6 generations on the father's side of the groom and bride, and up to 4 generations on the mother's side of the groom and bride. Some Orthodox Hindus might extend this limit up to 8 generations on the father's side and 6 generations on the mother's side for both the bride and groom. Although marriages between persons having the same gatra are generally frowned upon, how this is defined may vary regionally. Depending on the culture and caste of the population in the region, marriage may be restricted up to 7 generations of Gatra of father, mother, and grandmother. Marriage is banned within the same local community in a few rural areas. Stoicism. The founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium, stated that incest was permissible in Republic, as did the later prominent Stoic philosopher Chrysippus. However, Zeno only advocates for incest under unique circumstances, such as procreating with one's ailing mother to beget glorious children, thus comforting her. What the hell? Otherwise, incest is condemned as being contrary to nature. Zeno further condemns incest from a moral and psychological perspective, considering it to be a sign of Plato's tyrannical soul, defined as a soul that is governed by illimitable desire. He uses Oedipus as a tragic example. Nonetheless, later Stoic disciples by the 1st century BC downplayed the pro incest advocacy, accusing Zeno of being young and thoughtless when he wrote Republic. Okay, animals. Inbreeding avoidance is rare in non human animals. North Carolina State University found that bed bugs, in contrast to other insects, tolerate incest and are able to genetically withstand the effects of inbreeding quite well. Many species of mammals, including humanity's closest primate relatives, tend to avoid mating with close relatives, especially if there are alternative partners available. However, some chimpanzees have been recorded attempting to mate with their mothers. Male rats have been recorded engaging in mating with their sisters, but they tend to prefer non related females over their sisters. Livestock breeders often practice controlled breeding to eliminate undesirable characteristics within a population, which is also coupled with the culling of what is considered unfit offspring, especially when trying to establish a new and desirable trait in the stock. God. All right, so now we're going to look at incest. in America. 3:04 on the clock for the Great War. Okay, this is an AI overview. Incest, defined as sexual contact between close relatives such as siblings, parents, and children, or aunts, uncles, and nieces, nephews, is considered a crime in all U.S. states, even if both parties are adults who consent. According to the Legal Information Institute, LII or LEA, incest is marriage or sexual intercourse with a relative within the prohibited degree of consanguinity. Legal definitions and penalties for incest vary by state, with punishments ranging from significant prison sentences to life imprisonment in some instances. The social history of the American family. Okay. How levels of incest are on the rise in the U.S. March 21st, 2024. All right, we're going to take the first one. Legality of incest in the United States. Laws regarding incest in the United States vary widely between jurisdictions regarding both the definition of the offense and penalties for its commissions. Overview. In all but 2 states and the special case of Ohio, which targets only parental figures, incest is criminalized between consenting adults. In New Jersey and Rhode Island, incest between consenting adults 16 or over for Rhode Island, 18 or over for New Jersey is not a criminal offense, though marriage is not allowed in either state. New Jersey also increases the severity of underage sex offenses by a degree if they are also incestuous, and also criminalizes incest with 16 to 17-year-olds. The normal age of consent in New Jersey is 16. Ohio allows incest between consenting adults only when one party is not a parental figure. As of 2010, cases of incest involving consenting adults are often not revealed to outside parties, and therefore prosecutions of these cases do not frequently occur. Cases of parent adult child incest exposed to law enforcement are usually uncovered by the other parent. Okay, so let's look at known incestuous families of the U.S. Known incestuous Native American families. Okay. Iacah, IICH apostrophe AA. Navajo, Iacah, pronounced Ik-ah, no inflection, is a culture-bound syndrome found in the Navajo Native American culture. Symptoms include epileptic behavior, nervousness, convulsions, loss of self control, self destructive behavior, and fits of violence and rage. It can, together with other culture bound syndromes, notably Amok, Indonesian, Gila, Ningakak, Malay, Kafard, Polynesian, or Maldipilia of Puerto Rican, be grouped in the taxon SMAS syndrome or sudden mass assault syndrome. Mothway, or the Mothway myth, Ika translates to moth craziness or taboo breaking, which refers to the ancestral Navajo beliefs about this disorder. The literal translation of Ika is one who falls into the fire. Oh, it's given the one that was throwing himself into the fire in the Bible. Attraction to light and fire is a characteristic of the moth. The moth's behavior in Navajo storytelling is said to be a consequence of butterfly people or a mythical population having quote unquote gone wild after committing incest. Oh, this is crazy. The symptoms of Ika are said to be caused by the violation of the taboo of brother sister incest. This may or may not be scientifically correct, as inbreeding in general can lead to higher possibility of congenital birth defects, especially in small populations. However, it hasn't been proved in the specific case of Ika. However, the myth serves the prohibition of incest among the Navajo. The Mothway healing ceremony. Mothway is also the name of the healing ceremony used to heal Ika between 1940 and 1957. Mothway is part of the subgroup Mountain Chant, itself part of the subgroup Holy Way of Chantways. Navajo ceremonies are divided between chantways and rites. Chantways are characterized by a rattle accompanying the singing of a ceremony. The three types of chantways are Holy Way, Life Way, and Evil Way. Holy Ways focus on the restoration of good. Mothway was controversial amongst Navajo associated with witchcraft and thus soon became extinct. Descriptions report the patients wearing coyote skins, animals associated with incest in Navajo culture, and the performance of sexual intercourse. What? Okay. Native American views on mental illness and diagnostic. The DSM-IVTR glossary of culture-bound syndromes includes the following disorders specific to Native Americans, ordered here by decreasing frequency of diagnostic: susto, or fright, or soul loss, dissociative trance disorder, spirit possession, mental illness due to witchcraft, ghost sickness, Ika, and Piblotok. According to the Thomason Survey on the Assessment and Diagnosis of American Indian and Alaska Native (AIAN) clients, most clinicians, 60%, believe that counselors should assess their Native clients' acculturation type to be able to make an accurate diagnostic using